legislature of the student does not service the interest of the student, then it does not reflect the legislative arm of the students' union government. Now, within this view, we now see people trying to advocate for the supremacy of the legislative arm of government. We discuss literally that the three arms of government are coordinates. The three arms of government are coordinate. None is senior to the other. But scholars like ABSU tell us that the supreme arm or the most superior arm is the legislature. Because the legislature makes laws and the laws of the legislature cannot be quashed. But the laws of the executive can be quashed. I may not have to take you through the classroom of political science for you to understand that. But let's proceed. Now, when we talk about laws, if a law is made and the law does not obtain compliance, then it loses its vitality. And on the basis of that, I want us to have a more renewed perspective about the Student Representative Council. That they don't just come there to sit down and discuss wide range of things that fly past the air. They are there to make laws. They are there to make laws that reflect the interest of the students' welfare, which is why I want to say, and I want to request that there should be a review of the Student Representative Council to no more be a Student Representative Council, but to be the Student Senate. Same is the case with NANS. NANS have long evolved from being SRC to be SUG Senate. So I want to make that as an opinion, as a submission, hoping that by the time you get into office, you put it to force, such that the speaker will no more just be speaking, he will be the Senate President of the Student Union government. Secondly, who are the majority? Well, in every society we have majority, and in democracy we hear about the government of the majority. Who are the majority? The majority, by what we know or by what we understand, are those who form the most part of the population, and of those who, by the virtue of their notoriety, have gained the greater percentage of the population. But then, looking beyond that, in every gathering there are majority, and the majority within the view of the students' union government are those who have certain clusters of interest to protect. And in gathering, in the SUG Students Representative Council gathering, we should recognize the essence of the majority of the students and let the laws made, the policies made, the motions adopted reflect the interest of the majority. And who is that majority? Majority has to do with those who have major interest. Democracy is government of the majority. Doesn't mean that we don't have minorities. We have minorities who have peculiarities and interests. Then who are the minority? Minority are those who have the interest, but because of their condition and predicament, they do not have the powers to project their interest to be reflected in the governance of the laws of the state. But that does not mean that in decision making, in policy making, in passage of laws, that the minority should be relegated to the background. Fortunately, we might have some very good minorities with whose needs need to be addressed. You don't say because we are majority in the state, in the student house, the student representative house, therefore the opinions that the laws that must be passed must always be that of the majority. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge you to have in mind the existence of the minority. And the minorities must have their priorities and interests protected to a very reasonable and large extent. Now the third thing is alternatives. What the government does is to make law for the majority and provide alternatives for the minority. What are those alternatives? Alternatives are options for survival, because you have in mind that the longevity of the minority is at heart. For instance, before 2015, there was nothing like IDPs. Before 2015, there was nothing like internally displaced persons. Not until humanitarian advocates and human rights activists championed the cause of those who had been marginalized, subject because of internal insurrections that take place in states where they are. Of course, in Nigeria we have IDP camps, we have internally displaced persons camps, both in the northern and southern Nigeria. So those are minorities. We have the Amajiris, these are minorities. But because they don't occupy the centripetal point of decision making, their laws, their interests are not always protected. The government must want to provide exercise books for those who can see, before government will provide braille for those who are blind. The government must provide audition or auditory facilities, PA facilities for those who can hear, before the government provides hearing aids for those who are deaf. That is what we call providing alternatives for the minority. Now the next thing is considering the effect of laws. I have about 5 minutes. Considering the effect of laws. Laws have effects, and if you make a law, you should consider the impact of those laws. And if you know that a law will give us a negative impact, we will withdraw from making such laws. And if the law will give us a positive impact, we consider the option. But now, how do we know the effect of laws if we don't consider those laws by a predictive, proactive means of analysis? You have to understand how those laws are made, the procedure, who are the stakeholders, those that will be affected when the laws are actually passed. In this nature, you do a problem solution analysis. You look at the impact of the laws. How will those laws? Who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders are those who are either affected or infected by the law. I may not actually be affected by nobody. Maybe those that sell at Abia may not be affected by the ASU strike, but their relatives that sell at Abia will be affected somehow by the ASU strike. Directly, there is no direct impact on them. So what we are trying to say here is that laws may not actually affect the students. The laws you make should not consider only direct students. You should only consider what are later effects. If it affects students in 2015, in 2019, what about 2020? Sorry, what about if it doesn't affect students in 2020? What about students' welfare in 2021? So be futuristic in your scope of analysis, and then you have to equally consider the fact that a policy is a solution to a problem, just as it is a problem that needs another policy to solve it. What do I mean by this? For instance, the government decides to construct a road from Upgate to Okibe. The government has provided a solution to bad roads, potholes, and whatever. But then, at a point, we now discover that the solution can lead to excessive speed. Because there is a leeway, there is a highway, everybody will be on top gear. And before you know it, we start hearing about ghastly motor accidents. We see people flying into the valley simply because the road has been constructed. There are no potholes and other encumbrances. We now discover that a policy is a solution, just like it is a problem. So we consider not just the solution aspect, but the problem or the outcome of the policy. Now, the second to last thing we're going to look at is what are the feedback mechanisms. You have to have a feedback mechanism. You have to have that interaction with students. From time to time, you organize a town hall meeting of stakeholders in the students' union, department heads, faculty heads, class reps. You hear from them. Organize forums. We have your subcommittees. Your subcommittees organize sensitization talks. From time to time, you have a feedback mechanism or a feedback loop, a situation whereby you hear directly what the students are passing through and what could be the outcome of those laws which you have made. And then lastly, we're going to look at the domestic interest. Every law should have a domestic interest. You do not import laws without considering the domestic interest of the people. You don't say because those in the University of Lagos every legislature in the University of Lagos has a car. Therefore, we have to request that the BC buys cars for all the SROs. No, that would be fine, but what is the domestic interest involved? So before you come up with a policy, before you come up with a decision, you have to consider the domestic interests that are to be protected. I have less than 2 minutes. In conclusion, we have looked at quite a number of things. Number one is the dynamic nature of the society. Because of the dynamic nature of the society, there are proliferation of ideas, proliferation of novelties, and these novelties, as you have seen, have given birth to problems. And now it now behoves on the legislature to make sure that solutions are created by virtue or by a system of laws or policies. Solutions are created to the realities that resurge consistently in the society. And now there is need to revamp the legislative system to welcome new dynamics that will embrace the peculiarities of the 21st century. And these dynamics must illustrate the relevance of, number one, issue of the majority, the existence of the majority. Number two, recognize the existence of the minority. Thirdly, provide effective alternatives for the minority who might not be direct beneficiaries of the law. Now, secondly, understand the impact of laws made by the legislature and provide a feedback loop, a feedback mechanism to examine and reflect on the impacts of those laws, and then consider domestic peculiarities. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dean Student Affairs, on the basis of these convictions, we are hopeful that the Students' Union Government, the SRC, and would-be senators of the Student Union Government will have laws that will illustrate and reflect the tenor and the contour and the texture of the 21st century. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
One, two. Please, a round of applause for Dr. Shebbs Emmanuel for that wonderful lecture. So you said something. He talked about when they reconstruct a road. Mm-hmm. He talks say for there, say people go dey speed, some go dey enter inside bush because they don't reconstruct. Oh Jesus! So yes, we want the road like that. Let's be speedy. With pothole, with or without pothole, there must be accidents. So we need clean beds. It better make the road dey clean than to do pothole. Because God will rest for you now. God will say, see the road where you die. It's better you die in a clean road. Wisdom. If you don't have sense, have money. Don't be useless 2 times. So, but that was a nice lecture. As we were talking, as the lecturer was delivering his lecture, a spiritual father stepped in. Please, a round of applause for our spiritual daddy, Venerable Ugochukwu Ihechukwu. Sir, please, you're welcome, sir. Daddy, we wanted you to say the opening prayer, but we started before you came. We are so sorry for starting on time. It's not your fault, it's our fault. But somebody prayed. So, ladies and gentlemen, we want to light up this building small. So, I want DJ to drop. No verse. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, with the spiritual daddy, another of the first student, 001 of ABSU. Please, a round of applause for Wakama John. Please, clap for him. Wakama, you are owing me 10,000. You have paid me 250. Is remaining how much? 9,750. Come and give me another 250 now. You don't know what Wakama owe you. He go pay you the money go useless for your hand. 50 naira. And it can be calculative, eh? Can you give me 1,000 from that 10,000, please? So let's go there. DJ is going to drop 5 beats back to back. Let's light up the building small. If you are ready, I'm ready. DJ, please. Let's go there. If you can stand up and shake your body. If you can stand up and shake your body.
Jerusalema ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami
Yeah.